Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending the Thursday training on May 21st. We are very fortunate to have Nick Place present to us on drug trends. This is a 2-hour training. And if you look in the chat box, there is a link that once this is filled out, if you complete the link, you would be able to get 2 hours of credit towards your prevention specialist designation if you so choose. Thank you for joining us. I'm Phil Duquette out of New AHAC and the Alliance for Wisconsin Youth, and we're very pleased to, as I said, bring Nick Place in to present to us. Nick is very well respected throughout the county or the country for his presentations on drug trends, and considering all the things that are going on now, it's definitely a time for us to hear from one of our favorite experts on the issue. So Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you. And again, I ask everyone to please keep your audios on mute. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat box. So take it away, Nick.
All right, and let me just make sure I can find said chat box. Or Phil, if you do see questions come up, would you mind
I'll take care. I'll
give
I'll
an
let you know.
assist and just let me know.
Yep.
Sometimes I get going and I keep going right on that plane. But thanks everyone for joining. As Phil said, my name is Nick Place. My full-time job is a police officer for the city of Manitowoc PD, though I'm not representing them today in that capacity. I've been a police officer for almost 20 years. Since 2004, I've been a drug recognition expert. And what that is we are police officers trained to detect a drug other than alcohol in impaired drivers. But the role of the DRE often expands to beyond that, and we're asked to wear many different hats. And throughout my career, I've taken a huge interest in this topic, and it's kind of bloomed from there. And I would like to thank the Alliance for Wisconsin Youth for asking me back today, and Annie and Phil, though Phil says he's going to be done here in September, that he's retiring. And I told Phil that once you retire, life gets harder because you never get a day off. So thanks and congratulate Phil on your retirement coming up here in the near future. All right, so there's my contact information. Again, I work for the city of Manitowoc PD. I'm fortunate enough to wear a few different hats there, my favorite of which is being a canine handler. That is the best job in the world. Every single day you get to go to work with your best friend. So some of my contact information there. The best way to really get a hold of me if you do have questions is to email the DRE11379. That is my DRE number, and I will do my best to get back to you. I really do try to answer emails within 24 hours, but come tomorrow afternoon, my life will get a lot busier because I have 3 boys and they all are going to be out of school. So that will, which is a good thing, that it will take up a lot of time. So it's kind of good to get this in before they're off of school. And then too, there's some extra things that I do. I do teach in addition to doing groups like this, doing virtual presentations for groups like the Alliance for Wisconsin Youth. I also do law enforcement training as well. And I did start up a podcast. I did cover some of the things that we are going to discuss today on drug trends, such as Delta 8 THC and other ones out there like designer opiates, which is huge. Those are picking up designer benzodiazepine drugs. So things like Xanax. What we're seeing on the black market is companies in China, illicit companies in China, Mexico, and elsewhere are distributing narcotics through the internet, through the dark web. And sometimes it's not even on the dark web. You can just do a simple Google search and find some of these companies that are out there. But that's an emerging trend too. I do talk about that on my podcast. But I wish I was a little bit farther along. Putting a podcast together is actually a ton of work, a lot more work than I anticipated, but I do plan to get some more episodes out here in the near future as well. So if that's something you're interested in, if you're traveling from point A to point B, check me out. So that's out there as well. I give my usual warning, my disclaimer here. So I'm not going to do anything inappropriate or unethical, that kind of thing. I try to play it straight down the line. I try not to make things too political, but we talk about cannabis. It's hard not to talk about the politics with it because, especially right now, it is a hot button topic. But again, I'm not going to do anything unethical or jeopardize my career here today. But the views and opinions here are my own, and they don't represent the Drug Recognition Expert Program, either on the national level or on the state level. I don't represent law enforcement agencies or other government entities or Chuck Norris, because if Chuck Norris did drugs, he would collapse drug infrastructure around the world. So just putting that disclaimer out there. If you do have an issue with something here, please address it with me or with Annie or Phil, and we can talk about it. But just putting that out there as disclaimer about some things that are said here today. So the big hot button topic when I spoke to Annie a little bit yesterday about some expectations and things that she would like to see with this presentation. And if you've heard me talk before, I did a couple of these presentations back for civilian groups back in February. And I said at the time that Delta 8 THC, in my opinion, was going to be the drug trend of 2021. And so far I have been right. I watched this drug trend develop over the past 2 years. And 2 years ago, I first learned about Delta 8 THC, and I really didn't put a whole lot of stock in it. I thought it would probably be a fad. And the more I learned about it, especially as this trend took off in the later part of last year, I thought it could have some wheels and it could really take off. And I'll explain some of that here in a moment, some of the things that I did behind the scenes to not only teach groups like yours, but also law enforcement and why I thought it would take off. And it's pretty much, the long and short of it is it's just another form of marijuana. It causes some of the same impairment that we see with marijuana. But the glitch, the technicality in all this is that, and I'm sure most of you are aware that hemp producers are trying to make the case, and they are making the case that the stuff is legal because it is made through isomerization of CBD. So that is kind of the catch-all here with this. And I'll talk about now. Back in February, I said it's the trend is that that's being marketed is that this stuff is likely legal. However, I did explain that on the federal level, Delta 8 THC is listed as a controlled substance. And we really needed to wait to see how some things would shake out. Well, 3 months later, we have seen some things shake out, and I'll explain some of those here in a moment, where the federal government, the DEA, has come out and said this stuff is illegal, that the isomerization process used to make Delta 8 THC from the CBD molecule in hemp is illegal under federal guidelines under the Federal Controlled Substance Act. And we're kind of waiting. There's been some states that have acted on it too. And then in this state here, there are some municipalities that are using their local THC or their local marijuana ordinances to go after Delta 8 THC, though it's not all. Okay, so still some things that are going to play out here or through the rest of the year. I would imagine, it's my speculation, that you're going to see more municipalities, more states jump on board with restricting Delta 8 THC. And again, I'll cite some of that here in a moment. And if you need some information too, I could probably at the end of the presentation or after this, I can put together a PDF document with some of these sources, because I know that's popular with a lot of you. So the claim, again, is that the Delta 8 THC, the cannabinoid, is not as psychotropic as Delta 9 THC or marijuana. Now, when I first started to dig into that claim, I found some sources, but when I spoke to people who are in the chemistry field, a lot of them told me that the stuff that High Times and Leafly and some of these other cannabis publications were citing, that research that they cited wasn't published. So there's a lot going on with Delta 8 THC, and some of these sources that you see from not only High Times and Leafly, but some of your local CBD stores where they're giving you information, they're getting this from unpublished sources. So there needs to be a lot of research yet put into Delta 8 THC or some of these up and coming cannabinoids that are also isomerized from hemp, things like Delta 6 THC, Delta 10 THC, THCV. There's some other ones in there too. The cannabinoid THCV, I would try to pronounce the whole thing, but I would have a fight right now with the English language, is that one, because it's a 7-bond molecule versus the 5-bond molecule of delta 9 and delta 8 THC, that the THCV molecule with its 7 bonds attaches to the CB1 receptor in the brain a lot stronger than those other cannabinoids, and thus creates more impairment than marijuana. So there's these up and coming ones here, and you're starting to see these other ones like delta 10 and THCV. In fact, I saw a post on social media, somebody looking for distillate, which is the end product of making like a BHO compound. He's looking to sell some of that and looking to get more of it. So these other cannabinoids, they're on the horizon. You're going to see a lot more of this stuff get pushed. And I think here too, as we talk about preventing drug use here with youth, if we don't get on top of delta 8 THC, if we continue to let this stuff grow like wildfire, and there's no checks and balances with it, you're going to see these other cannabinoids come into play as well. And it really is the Wild West right now as far as regulation in this state. There's nobody stopping anything. So the more this stuff goes unchecked, the more these other cannabinoids too are going to get a chance to play. And delta 8 THC is found in the cannabis plant. It's just found in very small concentrations. So what these companies are doing is they're using, so if this was a Broadway show, okay, if the cannabis plant was a Broadway show, your main players who are going to be on stage, your lead actors or actresses, are going to be marijuana or delta 9 THC and CBD. Those are found in larger quantities in the cannabis plant. There's also some other ones like CBG, that's like the mother cannabinoid. That's all the other cannabinoids start out as CBG and they eventually transform into delta 9 THC or CBD. But what these companies are doing then is they isolate the CBD molecule, and then they use isomerization, which is a chemical process. They keep the molecule the same, but through isomerization, using bases and acids, they change the atoms around a little bit, and it goes that molecule then turns from CBD into delta 8 THC. So the argument becomes, well, as isomerization, it is included in our hemp statute, which we'll talk about here in a second, that isomerization process. People that are for cannabis legalization, they're saying because delta 8 is isomerized from CBD, that makes it legal. On the other side of the argument is this is a chemical process, this is a chemical synthesis. What you're doing here is technically illegal. So that gray area is starting to play out a little bit more. Some are taking action on this stuff, some aren't. My investigation so far is very limited. I don't have any published research, but I've done some limited dosing. And also too, just talking to people, just the dosing that I have done, what products that I know to be delta 8 THC that were sent off to a lab, and there's no marijuana in it. I saw the same cannabis impairment with delta 8 THC products that I did with marijuana. Okay, so I'm talking about things like red and watery eyes, dilated pupils, rebound dilation, that kind of thing, things that you would expect to see from marijuana. I also saw with delta 8 THC, and I've taken some additional classes too on my end, such as going to a green lab. So I went to the state of Colorado 5 years ago, and I took a class on it's called a green lab. So when police says, and what that is we do field sobriety tests, but in this case with marijuana. So when police officers are trained in the academy, they go through a class called the standardized field sobriety tests, and we teach them how to identify people under the influence of alcohol. And part of that class, when we teach recruits, is we have what's called a wet workshop, an alcohol workshop, where we bring volunteers in. These volunteers have a great time. We feed them, we give them booze, and then part of the deal is they have to do field sobriety tests for the recruits, and that's the way to learn, so they can identify things like the horizontal gaze nystagmus and how people look when they're under the influence of alcohol. Now, all of us have seen what somebody looks like when they're drunk, but what we try to teach the police officers is you've seen this before. You've all seen somebody who's drunk. Now, what we're trying to teach you to do is look for specific things that we know is caused by alcohol impairment. Okay, so we're looking for red and glossy eyes. We're looking for things like the horizontal gaze nystagmus, and it gives them some reps to learn not only how to gather additional evidence and prove a case in court, but to articulate some of those signs and symptoms of alcohol impairment. Now, there's green labs that are starting around the country, And what those green labs do, instead of alcohol, you're using marijuana. So the green lab that I attended, they did both. They did the flower or the smokable form of marijuana. They did dabs. So one woman that I did field sobriety tests on, she said she smokes 6 joints a day. And to get high off of marijuana now, she has to dab. Okay. So it's a higher dose of THC. And to get the impairment that we were looking for, she had to dab before the class because she smokes so much weed. And there's some other ones in the class, some older, I'd say they're in their 50s. Don't you really use marijuana, but we gave them a marijuana edible at the start of the class. So when the class started, there wasn't any impairment, but if you don't know, it does take a little bit for an edible to set in. So about 45 minutes, 60 minutes later, they started to exhibit impairment and also tell us the subjective feel, what they were, the effects of the drug as well, and what they were feeling, such as the sensation in the face. Their faces were tingling, but they also did have dilated pupils, red and glossy eyes, that kind of thing. So having that experience in other states and bringing it here too is worthwhile for me. And I use that too to that template to set it up for Delta 8 THC. And I would like to do more of that too with law enforcement and maybe down the line with civilians too, because learning, if you went through like a DITEP class, learning some of these field sobriety tests, there's value in it, but I think there's more value if you can do this with drug impaired people. And whether you like it or not, I think we could probably all agree that cannabis legalization is coming, and having that additional experience to actually have somebody under the influence of cannabis and then identify those signs and symptoms of impairment would be a worthwhile training experience. So then the bottom one here too, and we're going to talk about this because I know a lot of you are involved with youth and substance abuse prevention, is that right now, and we're going to talk about the laws here in a second, I'm going to bring up our state statutes, is that there's no age restrictions on hemp sales to minors. It's really on the honor system. It really is. And that makes me uncomfortable. I think for a lot of you, that should make a lot of you uncomfortable, that we're really relying on a gas station owner or a CBD store owner to enforce age restrictions, to check IDs, to make sure nobody under the age of 18 or 21 or whatever age you want to set, that those kids aren't coming into their store. Okay. So I went into one of our local gas station stores that sold Delta 8 products behind a counter. And I'm like, hey, what are you doing here to check ages? And they're like, well, we keep it behind the counter, and our owner said we have to ask for ID for anybody we think is under the age of 21. So there's really little enforcement from a law enforcement perspective. There's nothing in the state statute that prohibits them from selling that stuff, and that needs to change. Okay, and we're going to talk about that here a little bit later too, but we need to get the ball rolling on that. All right, so state statute 94.55, the state of Wisconsin, that is our hemp statute. So this is where the big, especially in this state, where there's right now some debate on whether Delta 8 or any of these other psychotropic cannabinoids made from hemp, whether they're legal or not. And it's coming down to how you interpret, or how a judge or an attorney, how these people interpret this hemp law. So hemp means the cannabis plant, sativa L, and any part of that plant, including the seeds thereof, and all derivatives, extracts, cannabinoids, isomers. Okay, we talked about the isomerization process a little bit, acid salts, blah, 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 blah. Whether growing or not, with a Delta 9 THC concentration of not more than 0.3% on a dry weight basis. Dry weight basis is how they measure this stuff, by removing the water content in it. And the state law here also gives producers and growers a little bit of leeway here, up to 1%. If you listen to people that grow hemp, they'll tell you that trying to get to that 0.3%, it sometimes can be a tough task to do. So they're given a little bit of leeway there to 1%. So that is our state law right there. And this is where it comes down to is these cannabinoids that are made from hemp, these psychotropic cannabinoids like Delta 8 THC, they're made using isomerization. So on one side of the aisle, again, you've got people in the cannabis industry that are arguing that since we're making Delta 8 THC from isomerization, that makes it legal. All right. On the other side of it, they're saying that this is a synthetic process and because of that, this is essentially a loophole, and they're trying to close it. The other part here, cannabinoids, again, delta 8 THC. If this was a Broadway show, it's part of the show, but it has a very, very small role in the Broadway show itself. There are delta 8 THC molecules, that cannabinoid is present in the plant, but it's in a very, very small concentration. So if you were going to extract delta 8 THC from hemp, you would need a lot of hemp to get it done because it's in so much small concentrations. So that's why they'll take another cannabinoid like CBD, extract it from the plant, isolate it, and then use isomerization to change it. Okay. So right now in our state, we don't have any court rulings. So no judges, an appellate court or a Supreme Court has come out and said that delta 8 THC is illegal. The Attorney General's office, I'm going to talk a little bit about the conversation I had with Annie yesterday as far as coalitions and putting the pressure on groups. If this is something that you don't want to see in the hands of kids, I think it's prudent on all of us to get involved here and make some changes. I have contacted the Attorney General's office several times over the past few months since January started on, hey, what are we doing with this? Are you guys going to come out with some guidance for law enforcement agencies? Because a lot of chiefs and sheriffs aren't going to make decisions on it until we have the Attorney General's office or some ruling out there that's going to give chiefs and sheriffs some enforcement power. Hey, we got somebody who needs to mute their gotta have some crisscross applesauce here. Somebody has there we go. All right, there we go. We got the mute back on. But where I was saying that we need, the Attorney General's office, I think it would help if they came out and put some guidance out there from law enforcement agencies to give us some more teeth. And I'll share with you an opinion of one state legislator and in his what happened after a bust in Menominee Falls, saying that delta 8 THC was not part of the hemp bill that was passed in 2019. So I'll share with some information too on people in the cannabis industry. Even they're saying that this is a legal gray area and the delta 8 THC products could be outlawed by the federal government. Like I said, the DEA has come out and said delta 8 is illegal, and state governments, and you're seeing more state governments, even those in legal marijuana states, have come out and said, like, this stuff is regulated just like marijuana. Okay. So I kind of touched on it earlier here. We'll jump back here in a moment. But as far as local jurisdictions using their THC ordinances to enforce delta 8 THC. So somebody comes across, an officer comes across somebody with delta 8 THC. The person says, hey, I bought this at a gas station, or I bought this at, such and such CBD store. I was told this is legal. There are some places, not all, certainly not all, but there are some places that are using their local ordinances to enforce delta 8 THC. So this is a start. And I'm just going to give you a copy here, or just of one ordinance from a local municipality on THC. But here it is. No person may possess or attempt to possess tetrahydrocannabinols, commonly known as THC, in any form, but not limited to THC found in marijuana, obtained from marijuana, chemically synthesized, or any controlled substance analog of tetrahydrocannabinols. So, there's some local jurisdictions that are saying with the local city or town or village, that local ordinance is good enough that they feel to get a conviction in their court. Again, some of this stuff has yet to play out yet, but there's some places out there that are willing to take a dip in the pool, if you will, to see if this will change. So that's one avenue that's out there. Okay. Just some things to be careful though. Like I talked to a DRE in the central part of the state, and he says that his attorney has, or his local jurisdiction has an ordinance similar to this one, and their local attorney's take on this, their prosecuting attorney's take on it, is that they don't believe that the language in their statute would be enough, something similar to this, to get a conviction, especially if it has something where they're saying that any changes in state law then would be retroactive to our ordinance and thus would change it. So there's, again, some things to play out there. And I think it would really help if we had some additional guidance from the state, or if the state came out and specifically listed things like delta 8 THC or some of these other psychotropic cannabinoids. Again, would give law enforcement agencies a little bit more teeth, and district attorneys across the state would help them feel a little bit better if we had more of that type of language out there. So I'm just going to end this. I want to just bring up some of the state laws that are out there that we have. So if you're not familiar with it, Chapter 961 of Wisconsin state statutes covers drug laws in the state of Wisconsin. 961.32 covers possession authorization for hemp products. Okay, so if you go look this up, you can go, if you just do a Google search of Wisconsin statutes, it will bring you to the Wisconsin legislative page. And from there, you can find any state law that we have. You just got to put it in, or you go into the search feature, like on the top right of the page here, and you can look up any law in the state. So when we're going to talk about possession authorization, they talk about some things here like the certification here. So when Wisconsin first legalized CBD, I think it was 2017, 2018, there was some debate at the time whether or not CBD was legal. And part of that debate came around this whole certification on it, that you had to get treatment for a medical condition. You had to have a certification. So basically this the fancy word for prescription from a doctor saying that, you know, you have some medical condition and that you need CBD to help treat it. So you had people on one side of the aisle saying CBD was illegal unless you had this certification from a doctor. On the other side of it, you had people saying that wasn't the legislative intent of the law, that hemp products were legal. Ultimately, I think it was Brad Schimmel was our attorney general at the time. He came out and made a ruling that said that hemp products were legal and that the CBD law here was meant for a different purpose. And that's how part and do why we saw CBD take off in this state. There were some agencies that were making arrests based off this language here, and their interpretation was you had to have this certificate in order to legally possess CBD. And then you had others saying that that wasn't the case. And ultimately here, the hemp products were our attorney general at the time said, you're good to go. So that kind of helped take off. And then a lot of the language in this statute here, as far as possession authorization, comes down to growing, exporting hemp products, transferring them. I'll talk here in a moment here. It can be a mess, and a lot of law enforcement agencies don't want to touch it because, in my opinion here, we need to have a better way to track this stuff. We need to have better paperwork and an understanding of what some of that looks like here. But a lot of the language that you see in the statute here, especially under subsection B, has to do with some of the regulations that growers and manufacturers have to follow, and specifically not having the cannabinoid delta-9 THC, aka marijuana, in a certain percentage. Okay, and again, that's going to be 0.3%, but they'll give an extra 0.7, so technically up to 1% as a little bit of leeway with that. I think either it's this stat, and it goes through some penalties and stuff like that. But what is missing here is we need more stuff here on the retail end. Okay. And that's what's missing here in that. Also, what's missing, and we're going to talk about this again later on, but you don't see anything in this here for possession regarding anybody under, setting an age limit. So, and that needs to change. There's nothing in here that says that you got to be 18 years old to have delta 8 THC, or 21. I think 21 is probably going to be the more acceptable age limit, just because that's what we have for alcohol. And other states with legalized marijuana are using 21 years old as their age limit to possess marijuana. Okay, that's missing from our statute. I'm not going to blame legislators or the governor for that. I think that the intent when this law was drafted was they didn't want to restrict things to kids that when CBD was first legalized, it was only in our state, in Wisconsin, it was only legalized for kids with certain type of epilepsy conditions. So kids with rare forms of epilepsy, they could get CBD medication to help with that. And it has shown promise. So CBD is used, there's a drug out in the market called Epidiolex. It is for kids with those rare forms of seizures that other medications didn't work, but they use a CBD medication and it helps control it. Okay. And the backstory to all this, when I went to Colorado to learn more about marijuana use, one of the instructors out there said that when cannabis advocates want to legalize marijuana, they are going to try to win hearts and minds. And one of the ways that they're going to do that, the playbook that they use, is they try to win hearts and minds first by putting these hard luck stories out there. Okay. So they're going to give examples of kids with cancer, kids with seizures that are suffering. They're going to roll in some old ladies and old men in wheelchairs and, this guy needs to smoke weed because he gets so much pain. But then you go to these pot fests and these medical marijuana fests, and there's not a gray or white hair to be found in the entire facility because it's just a bunch of college kids smoking weed. So just kind of keep that in mind too, that you're going to get these hard luck stories out there. And the same thing plays out here. I think 2 years ago when Evers was rolling out legalizing marijuana in Wisconsin, you saw all these hard luck cases go to the state capitol. I need marijuana for this and that. But then you go to, some medical marijuana fest and it's rap music and 20-year-olds smoking weed. There's very few gray hairs in those places. But that, some of that needs to change a little bit here. Then as far as the state statute for hemp, we talk about cannabis sativa L plant. Okay, that's the definition I copied and pasted right from state statute. And a lot of the hemp here goes into, again, there's no age limits. So nobody doesn't say anywhere in here about somebody under the age of 21 possessing hemp products. It goes into a lot of, as far as the guidelines that hemp producers have to follow. So they have to, you got to register with the state. It goes into paying a fee to get registered with the state. Then every year, the process that you have to do to be able to grow hemp covers that. Testing procedures. So if you decide to grow hemp, so if Nick, instead of growing tomatoes and squash this year, I want to start to grow hemp, well, I'd have to go through the states. I'd have to fill out a form to get registered. I'd have to tell the state where I'm going to grow it. And part of that too is that they notify local law enforcement. So if my neighbor peeks over my back fence and sees what appears to be marijuana plants growing, that I have it on record that I'm growing hemp, and then local law enforcement is notified as well that it's on record that Nick Place is growing hemp in his backyard and he doesn't have a grow. Okay, and then the state can come and they can audit me. So they will come, they could check, they'll pick a random plant, send it off for testing, make sure that I'm not growing the devil's lettuce in my backyard and I am growing hemp. And then I have to send one of my final samples in to get tested and analyzed. But there's a whole process that goes with that. And along with that too, it talks a little bit about buying seeds from a licensed grower, or a licensed distributor. So growing hemp, they just don't let you, like, I can't go to Phil and say, hey, Phil, can I have some of your magic seeds to grow hemp? Because Phil is not a licensed distributor of hemp seeds. So I have to go through a company that sells specific hemp varieties, and that is mainly due to keep the THC content at that 0.3% level. And it's due a lot in part to genetics. So the genetics of the plant will help determine to keep that low THC level there. So just like to give an analogy here, genetics plays a huge role in a lot of different things. So if Aaron Rodgers returns to the Packers next year and you're looking for a left tackle, you're not going to get someone like me who was 5'10" and 200 pounds to block Aaron Rodgers' blindside at left tackle. You're going to want some big guy that looks like a door. He's going to be 6'7", 330 pounds. He got that big through genetics. He didn't have my genetics that prevented my basketball career from really prospering because I'm short and I can't run or jump. Okay, so that plays a part of that, not just with humans but with plants as well. You want those good genetics to help get that plant at that correct THC level. And let's see here, can I minimize this? While we're talking about local ordinances, I wanted to share this here. This is from the city of Marinette, Wisconsin, who probably has the most, in my opinion, the most restrictive cannabis ordinances in the entire state. So if you're looking for an example, if you're having community discussions on how to limit this stuff, you're going to want to see how the city of Marinette is doing their business. So they have in their ordinances, again, just do a Google search, look it up. It looks like it's section 11 of the city of Marinette code. They're a little bit ahead of the game. So they decided, since they border up the Upper Peninsula, aka the Wisconsin second state here. A lot of people think we should merge the UP with the state of Wisconsin, but the UP, obviously, marijuana is legal there. The city of Marinette decided to get ahead of the game, and they didn't want any of that stuff coming across the border. If marijuana would become legalized here, they didn't want any marijuana dispensaries or cannabis groups in their city setting up shop. So they decided to get ahead of the game, and they created an ordinance doing that. Okay. And I couldn't find it on this one here, but contacted DRE that I know, Lieutenant Scott Reese of the Marinette Police Department, told me that this also includes all cannabis products. So hemp is also included with it. He said they had a interesting conversation with the local Walmart, who was their Walmart was selling hemp hand lotion and things like that. And they had to tell Walmart they had to pull it from their shelf because it was against the local ordinance. So in the city of Marinette, you're not allowed to sell any cannabis products. So yeah, if you're gonna model any ordinances, if you're looking for something to go after or use as a template for change where you live, I would recommend using Marinette's ordinance as an example. Let's see here. And then here too, one more one. We'll talk a little bit about in a second on the federal level and how the DEA has scheduled Delta 8 THC. So what I have found here, if you go put a Google search at DEA controlled substance list, you'll find what's called the orange list. Again, orange list. I think they call it the orange list because on the top of the page here, it's got that orange header. But so the DEA will list all the controlled substances as part of the Federal Controlled Substance Act. In that, they do list Delta 8 THC in there under tetrahydrocannabinols. So that is partly where some of this enforcement action comes from, is the feds, the DEA has listed Delta 8 THC and any chemical synthesis thereof of hemp as a controlled substance. Okay, that's how they're treating that. And this is, again, coming straight from the DEA website and their list of controlled substances. So if you're looking for some extra teeth, the federal government has come down and said that stuff is illegal. So what to do here in Wisconsin? This is a pretty accurate depiction of how we enforce cannabis regulations here in the state of Wisconsin. It is literally a dumpster fire of dog poop. That is, I can't describe it any better than that. And I know somebody will probably say, well, Nick, that's pretty rough analysis. Well, I couldn't think of a better way to describe it. It is a dumpster fire of dog crap. That is how we enforce cannabis in this state. There is none of it. You don't have anybody from the state going around checking this stuff. Very few law enforcement agencies are conducting random checks and sending things off for samples to see the THC content. I'll share a story of one of those with you here in a second, but nobody's checking up on this stuff. In fact, I could guarantee it. I can guarantee if you had some police agencies go around and start checking this stuff, you would be, well, I wouldn't be surprised, but some may be surprised on, the amount of Delta 9 THC that shows up in CBD or Delta 8 that sold as Delta 8, but really has marijuana in it. Nobody's checking up on this. It is the Wild West. So we got to start somewhere. And the longer that this goes on, the longer that this Pandora's box remains open, the harder it will be to close it and to keep it shut. And there's nobody checking on this stuff. It is a dumpster fire. So when you think about, why this is important, we got to get a handle on it, because we can't have gas station owners as the gatekeepers to keep psychotropic cannabinoids away from kids. Okay, that is unacceptable. Okay, so here's some more pictures of screenshots that I took over here the last month. Okay, so there's even people, like I mentioned before, that in the cannabis industry that state that this stuff, the Delta 8 THC, if you sell this stuff, you are risking prosecution. You are risking your business and livelihood getting shut down. All right. So the one on the left there. So I follow a couple different groups on social media because I like to keep on top of things. It's just one avenue that I do that. So this lady here on the Grow Hemp Wisconsin Facebook group, Stephanie Bino, advises you probably should think twice, maybe 3 times before picking up Delta 8 THC. It's not as legal as suggested by producers and marketers. All right. Goes into some of the DEA guidance that was given. Okay. We'll talk here in a second about these other 2 articles here. The first of which, coming from WTMJ out of Milwaukee, Menominee Falls CBD shop owner says authorities raided his store for selling legal products. Darn police officers busting his store. So I printed off the story. I'll read it here. So what happened here was the Waukesha County Sheriff's Office received a tip that there was a CBD store in their jurisdiction in Menominee Falls called Superstar Buds. Superstar Buds seems very, it's like a real medicinal name there. They were selling products with THC in them. Shocking. So they conducted some undercover buys and sent those samples off for testing. They said that they had a non-fatal overdose incident involving 2 small children who unintentionally ingested a CBD-related product, and they had to get some medical attention. So they started to do an undercover sting. They checked out Superstar Buds, and they found that, in fact, that there were prohibited levels of Delta-9 THC or marijuana in CBD products and Delta-8 THC products. Kudos to the Waukesha County Sheriff's Office for having the cojones to go out there and do this, because there's there's law enforcement agencies that just are afraid to jump in the pool, and it's a little refreshing to see that they're not afraid to check up on this stuff and actually dig into it. And it looks like they did things the right way. So that was the concern, was that this was a front for a marijuana business. Okay, so then Chris S. of Superstar Buds, the owners, blamed law enforcement for causing $100,000 in damage between stuff they destroyed and seized. For Chris, there's a very small violin playing somewhere for his concerns. And so the officers confiscated his top selling product, Delta-8 THC. It's, a legal form of marijuana. No surprise there. I mean, this stuff is selling like hotcakes. Okay. Not a surprise there. There's a lot of people on social media from the CBD aspect of it that are saying that, when CBD came out, a lot of people tried it. It caught on, but it's not the real thing. Some of them weren't getting the high that they expected, like they would get from marijuana. So CBD started to dive off a little bit, and some of these CBD owners were concerned that they would lose their business. So then Delta-8 THC comes along, and people were getting that psychotropic effect from it. They're getting that high. Well, then business started to pick up. So for a lot of people, they put their livelihood into these CBD stores, and they needed this. They needed something to come along to help them out. And here comes Delta-8 THC to save the day. Okay, so then he goes into a song and dance about how he's being targeted, blah blah blah. So in this, the sheriff's office said in his statement, story, it was published. This one was published on, let me see here. I think this was back in, I printed it off today, but it was from April. This was from April 2nd. So about 2 months ago. They said in their statement back in April that while executing the search warrant, investigators seized other products from the business that contained that were labeled as CBD or Delta-8 THC and believed and contained prohibited amounts of Delta-9 THC. And also here too, this is what's really important. So State Representative Adam Nylon of Pewaukee said, he's on record saying it, the law is crystal clear about it being outlawed in the state of Wisconsin. He said that, and he said that he was part of the vote that legalized hemp in Wisconsin. And he said the legislative intent of the hemp law in 2019 was not to legalize psychotropic cannabinoids found in hemp. I think there are some owners at these CBD stores who are relying on federal law to make their case, when in fact it's very clear in the state of Wisconsin that none of these products, CBD or THC products like Delta-8, are allowed to be sold that have psychoactive ingredients in them. Okay, so he goes on to talk about that, it's just a consequence of business, and that people that own CBD stores need to do a better job of educating themselves on what's legal and what's not, and law enforcement should take more of an educational approach to that. So there's a story, and that's just one example of one agency that went ahead and got the ball rolling and checked into it based off a tip. And this is quite common. So how this got started is you had kids, I'm guessing mom and dad left this stuff lay out, and we talk about these environmental scans that Phil and Annie discussed and why these are important. A lot of these products are labeled for kids. I'll share some examples of that here in a second, but they're labeling, like my family, we love Goldfish crackers. We love Goldfish. We buy them every single week. I love Goldfish crackers, for Pete's sake. I eat them too. Okay. But kids see that stuff laying out and they're going to eat it. And you're going to see, they're going to get the cannabis impairment just like any other adult, probably greater, which if they keep eating this stuff, Lord knows I have a 7-year-old, and when he comes home from school and sits down with his iPad to relax, I mean, he's just munching away at that stuff. If he gets a big dose of it, you're going to see a huge psychotropic effect on these kids. Okay. It's a common story that plays out. These marijuana candies are marketed to younger people, and the kids think it's goldfish crackers or Oreos or, Swedish fish or you name the candy, and they're going to eat it. And this is what happened because mom and dad are careless. Okay. So another story that came out of Marijuana Biz Daily, quote that one here too. So there, what the story, the content of the story was, be careful with Delta 8 THC products because it's a crackdown coming from the feds and other states as well. So Marley Weintraub, president of the U.S. Hemp Authority, said what they do is they test. They're a third-party testing agency for hemp groups around the companies around the country, that they will continue to ban, states will continue to ban Delta 8 THC and other products like it because the cannabinoid is an intoxicant deemed a controlled substance under federal law. Her advice is do not produce or sell Delta 8 THC products without a permit to produce or sell THC as a controlled substance. The correct path for legal production is through a state licensed adult recreational or medical marijuana operator. She also advises that if you risk selling Delta 8 THC products, you risk also being banned by the United States government and local and state governments as well for doing so, not following appropriate state law. They also quote the DEA. DEA declared that all synthetically derived THC remains a Schedule 1 controlled substance. They also, the DEA is also on record stating because Delta 8 THC is manufactured and from hemp-derived CBD and not extracted directly from the hemp plant. Remember what I spoke about earlier, that Delta 8 THC is found in small concentrations. So you need a lot of hemp to make that Delta 8 THC product if you directly derived it from the hemp plant. But because from a chemist's perspective, it is clear that the isomerization of CBD to Delta 8 THC with a catalyst is a chemical process. And any product with a chemical reaction like this one, by definition, is a synthetic chemical. So they're saying that it's illegal. So there, again, back in February, when I did these talks, I said it was a huge gray area. We had to see some things play out, but now you're starting to see the tide turn a little bit. You're seeing more states come on board. You have Alabama, you got some other ones. Illinois is coming out against it. Kentucky's putting in the article, they're coming out with it. Oregon, Washington State, Vermont, some of these are legal cannabis states, and they're saying that to sell Delta 8 in these states, even some with legal marijuana, that it's technically it's THC. You have to go through the marijuana channels to sell and produce those products. So there's more coming out, and I think that it will help regulation in these areas. Okay, so talking about cannabis enforcement here, and we'll get into some other drug topics too. I just don't want to talk all about weed. We got about an hour left, but as far as doing the environmental scans and the conversation I had yesterday with Annie on the phone, it's great that you guys are that are doing these things, that are going out and checking for things like, how is this stuff marketed? When you go talk, when you go into these stores and talk to these people, they love to talk about weed. Okay, they love to talk about it. If you start talking about marijuana, especially the medicinal aspects of cannabis, okay, it's going to be like going to going out for a night on your town with your wife and telling her that she's pretty and really meaning it. I mean, her face is going to get all red. She's going to blush. She's going to feel good. Or, telling your husband that he's got a great golf game, or that he looks like he's working out, giving some type of compliment to your significant other, it's going to have that same effect. I mean, you talk to them and you start, some of them don't believe whether in traditional pharmaceutical medications. So if you get, especially if you start putting it out there that, I tried this medication for depression or anxiety and it just didn't work. I don't think these doctors know what they're talking about, but marijuana, man, does that do the trick for me? It's organic and it makes me feel good. And I don't have to have all those nasty chemicals that the pharmaceutical companies put in their medications, I mean, they are going to light up like no one's business, and they're going to open up and talk to you. So, keep that in mind, that these people love to talk about cannabis, and all you got to do is just throw it out there a little bit, throw that line out there, and they will open up. So doing those scans out there, getting to talk about some of that, and what the psychotropic effects of delta 8 THC or some of these other psychotropic cannabinoids, by showing a little bit of interest, they might come out. And then part of that environmental scan, I think Phil was going to share his form with everybody. But, I think part of that was talking to the stores and seeing what the employees will give you as far as information on those products that they sell. Again, we talked about the, plotting out cannabis locations. I think what Phil and Annie and others like the Alliance for Wisconsin Youth, what you're doing is plotting out these cannabis locations in the state. That is great work. We don't, again, the dumpster fire that I showed you, that is the retail side of cannabis in this state. There is nothing tracking who's selling CBD. So right now it's largely on groups like yourselves to go out and to keep track of this stuff and plot it and what they're selling, doing those environmental scans, and keeping track of the different products that are out there, because nobody's doing it. I know for some that might be a shock, but I'll explain here in a second what's holding some of that back on the law enforcement end, but nobody's doing it. And it might be incumbent, if you're really serious about keeping this stuff out of the hands of kids, so we don't have things like happen in Waukesha happen in your jurisdiction, it's going to be a necessary thing to get done. Again,
Nick?
Yeah.
We were hoping that towards the end of this presentation that we might take about 10 minutes to discuss the scan.
Okay.
We haven't really rolled it out yet, so we're going to actually put a link to it in our chat box, but we would like to talk some more about it. I'm not sure everybody here listening knows about the scans yet. I know some have done it, but
okay.
We're hoping to roll it out right after this. So
I will not steal your thunder, Phil.
No problem.
I was trying to build it up. I think it's important, but I will leave it at that. I will let. I don't want to steal Phil's thunder. So, we talked about the age restrictions again, and a lot of it's based on the honor system. Delta 8 and drug testing. So if you, so I'll give you an example here. On Tuesday, I had to show up for a canine sniff at some local schools, and I was, came to work, and surprise, your name got pulled for a random drug screen. So part of my employment with the city of Manitowoc is I am subject to random drug screening. Now, let's say on Sunday, I decided to take a Delta 8 THC gummy. It would show up in the drug screen as THC. A urine drug screen cannot tell the difference between marijuana, Delta 8 THC, Delta 6 THC. It all shows up as it would show up. What they're looking for is they're looking for the metabolites of THC in that urine. Okay. But that urine test cannot tell the difference between marijuana and Delta 8 THC. So I would have a hot drug screen, okay? And I would have to sit down and have some explaining to do, probably when the results come back later this week or next week, with the chief of police. So what I caution people is, if you are subject to random drug screening, or if you have part of your employment, let's say you're a truck driver, this does happen quite a bit, where they take CBD products, it comes back hot, and they come back hot on a drug screen. You're going to have some explaining to do, because again, this is an unregulated industry, especially in this state. Nobody's really checking this stuff to make sure that when you go into a CBD store, or if you go into some head shop somewhere, that green leafy substance behind the counter, or that dab or that edible, doesn't have prohibited concentrations of marijuana in it. Nobody's checking on it, and a Delta 8 screen THC is going to look the same on a drug screen. All right. So don't take it if you're, especially if you have random drug screening. Delta 8 THC can be detected and different from marijuana in blood. So for example, law enforcement purposes, if we suspect somebody's under the influence of cannabis and we get a blood sample, we send it off to the state of hygiene for all impaired driving offenses that we do here and around the state. Blood samples get sent. Most of them get sent to the state lab of hygiene, though in certain situations, if it's a high profile felony case, like a OWI case, so like a fifth offense, or let's say a OWI homicide, so somebody drove drunk or high and killed somebody, that sample would get sent to the state crime lab. There's about 35,000 samples that are collected around the state a year, so there's a lot. But when I spoke to chemists at the hygiene lab, they said if in that blood sample, they can tell the difference between Delta-8 THC or some of these other psychotropic cannabinoids and marijuana. So that can be done. The tricky part that it's probably going to start to play out here in the near future as Delta-8 becomes even more popular is Delta-8 THC is not listed as a restricted controlled substance to drive on. Okay, marijuana is anything greater than 1 nanogram, which is as low as the machines can test for. That is considered a restricted controlled substance. Other drugs like heroin and meth and cocaine, LSD, your Schedule 1 drugs that are out there that are just illegal to possess anyway, those are all considered restricted controlled substances. And what that means is you can't have it in your system when you drive. So that could play out to be, and I think there's another argument that you could put in with that, because Delta-8 is, some of these are made through isomerization, that it's an analog of Delta-9 THC. I think you could make that argument, though that's speculation and has yet to play out. It's gonna, as Delta-8 continues to grow, I would expect that problem to be out there as well. And just another one out here too, I think I spoke a little bit with Annie yesterday about police canines in this state. The trend is to copy what other states are doing, and your canines going forward aren't going to be imprinted, which is the fancy, imprinted is the industry term for putting that odor into the dog. Okay, so they're not going to be trained in marijuana. That's the plain language speak of it. Imprinting means putting that odor into the dog, so the dog learns how to detect that odor. Why are they not doing that? Well, a couple of reasons here. What other states like Colorado, there's case law out of the state of Colorado that says that if your dog is trained in marijuana odor and it alerts to a car, because marijuana is a legal substance in the state of Colorado, that does not give the police probable cause to search that person's vehicle. There's plenty of case law around the country. The most notable case is going to be Illinois versus Cabela's, that allows police to do an open air sniff around a car. And if there's a controlled substance in there that you're not supposed to have, like cocaine or methamphetamine, or right now here in our state, marijuana, if you have that odor in your car and it escapes the car and the dog alerts to the air outside your car, that alert gives police probable cause to search your car. Again, the concern is that if you legalize marijuana and you have a police dog that was just trained, and the average cost of a new police dog is about $15,000, that $15,000 purchase, this equipment that you have, essentially a dog is a piece of equipment to help you search vehicles that you believe have controlled substances inside of them, that's pretty, you just wasted 15 grand. And with budgets being what they are and fundraising, and nobody wants to throw away $15,000. That's just the case. So they're just going to go ahead and not put that odor in the dog. And down the line, if marijuana stays illegal, you can always imprint the odor with the dog, and you can essentially train the dog to detect marijuana odor. Marijuana is a pretty easy odor to train. It's very pungent. Humans can smell it with no problem. So you're going to see that's the trend out there. It's just law enforcement agencies aren't going to buy a dog and have it get retired a year later because marijuana is legal. There's also some worries, and I get this question quite a bit about case law, that because hemp and marijuana allegedly smell the same, that you're going to have some judge make a ruling, and then there goes. Even if marijuana is still illegal, if some judge makes a ruling that hemp and marijuana are indistinguishable from one another, that's going to make these police dogs that are trained in marijuana odor irrelevant at that point, and they'd have to get a new police dog. Though there are no cases that I'm aware of, and I do follow this stuff pretty closely in our state, that say that. I do caution police officers on making those statements in court because of the amount of contaminated CBD products that are out there, and Delta-8 THC products, like the example that we shared in Waukesha. I have bought CBD products through my business and sent them off for testing, and they've come back with prohibited levels of THC in them. So my advice is this: unless you know for sure what is in that hemp product, don't assume that it's hemp, because it very well could be Delta 9 THC or very small amounts of it, because there are no regulations on the retail industry in this state. Nobody's checking it. So unless you know for sure, don't be making statements like that in court. And now we have bad case law out there. And here too, even if you have a police dog that's not trained in marijuana, I mean, humans can smell it pretty good too. So it's some advice. I don't want to steal too much of Phil's thunder as far as the environmental scans and setting that up here. But when you do make your case, and you do all that stuff that Phil's going to talk about towards the end of the presentation, and you start making your case to get, to limit cannabis and CBD stores in your state, and to help get the control the amount of that available to youth. Get your research and data together, do the things that Phil's going to talk about, be prepared for excuses. So the 5 or the 8 most dangerous words in law enforcement are, that's the way we've always done it. You're going to get that excuse. There's some people that, as marijuana becomes more accepted, they're going to lean towards legalization. So be prepared for that. Be prepared for that argument. There's really some limits on what law enforcement can do. I attended a DRE conference 4 or 5 years ago, and one of the presenters, he's a lieutenant from Peachtree City in Georgia. His name is Matt Jones. He's a lieutenant down there. Did a really good presentation on combating drunk driving and using groups like yours, like the Alliance for Wisconsin Youth, to help get policy change, help to get state laws changed. And one thing that Matt talked about was, it's really not going to be incumbent upon law enforcement that we really aren't going to get the job done, because a lot of politicians just aren't going to listen to us, and that we have to work together in coalitions just like this one to get the job done. And I'm not, before I get to, I'm not bad mouthing politicians. I'm not bad mouthing police officers or, chiefs or sheriffs. That's not my intent with this. My intent is to explain how things are and how it works. So Matt advocated that working with groups like this, if you're really looking for change, you have to do some of the grassroots work to get these changes done. And another thing he said too is, when you get your opportunity to have these meetings, be prepared for some sound bites and say some things that are going to catch someone's attention, because you could have only 60 seconds to make your pitch. If you do get a politician's ear, you may only have 60 seconds to make your case, and you got to make good sound bites to start off, because if you're rambling on about some topic and you're not getting what you want, your point across within 60 seconds, they might tune you out. And you may never get that opportunity again. Okay. So just like the rapper here, Eminem, he talks about, the song "Lose Yourself," like you might get one shot at it and that's it. So you gotta be prepared for some of the excuses that come out. You got to have your research together, because that opportunity might come and go when you're ready for that, to make your case for policy change. And then some of the things here too on the law enforcement end, sometimes we're just handicapped by just the state of how things are. So like in our state, in just the way politics are right now, I mean, let's face it, it's not a law enforcement friendly world, and some politicians aren't going to listen to what we have to say. So it's going to take a group effort, people on your side as well. I mentioned before, some law enforcement executives, administrators just are afraid right now to go out in the pool and take a dip without having some more backing, without having a court decision, without having a state law, an attorney general's decision to come out and help enforce some of these laws. So that's, I think, coming together and having that would help some jurisdictions help make some of these decisions if there's some backing there to go with it, because they don't want to expose themselves to unnecessary risk without some of that extra, either court decision, legislative action, etc. They would feel a lot better doing that if they had that there. And again, police officers like me, I can only do so much. I explained before that I had conversations with the Attorney General's office and some of the prosecutors there, like, hey, what are we doing with this? When are we going to come out for a decision? And they were kind of wait and see. Just keep in mind, I'm not bad mouthing my, here, but I am a low level line officer. Okay. I have a silver badge. I don't have a gold badge with bars or stars. So my influence only goes so far. And I'm not, again, bad mouthing anybody, but I'm realistic, and I understand what I say and what I can do. And I understand that I'm more effective in a support role and sharing information with groups like yours rather than going on the offensive myself. And I can do that and be more effective for change by doing things like this rather than doing that, because a lot of you are going to have more power and pull with things that you're doing and things like Phil's going to explain here at the end of the presentation than I could ever do. Okay. And that's, again, not to discredit me or anything, but I understand my role in this, and some based on some good advice that I've gotten in the past. And two, relying on advice. A lot of chiefs, they're not going to look at again a line officer with a silver badge. They're going to go to attorneys and their district attorneys, their prosecutors, their local attorneys to get decisions. And some of them may not be up to speed on some of these changes. And again, I'm not saying bad things. That's not what I'm trying to do, but you got to understand that a lot of district attorneys offices across the state, they are overloaded with work. They got too much on their plate, and digging into Delta 8 THC or some of these other drug trends, they're relying on other people for that, or they're relying on information. They're not, a lot of them aren't going to know about the problems like in Waukesha with stores selling marijuana disguised as CBD unless people on the ground do the work. So it's really, again, incumbent on all of us to get that information out there to them, because it's not that these people are doing a bad job. It's just they got a ton of work going on and they can't be everywhere at once. So I think, on the bottom here, what we got to get done like right now, like this has to change, is we have to have some age limits on and restrictions on who can sell psychotropic cannabinoids. And I really think the push should be to get to restrict it. Like, we shouldn't have it because it's psychotropic. It's essentially marijuana. But there has to be some age restrictions out there. We can't really leave it to the some gas station owner making a decision on, are we going to check IDs? And if you follow, like I've been a cop for almost 20 years, and we don't do random ID checks for alcohol on a continuous basis. And when you do that, how many times do you have gas station owners selling booze or beer to some 19-year-old kid because they didn't check ID? So if that's happening with alcohol, it's certainly going to be happening with these other psychotropic cannabinoids. And to think it's not, you'd be foolish to think that. So there has to be some more teeth in it to keep this stuff out of the hands of youth. And I don't have the data here today, but there's plenty of data out there, and I'm sure a lot of you know more about it than I do, that when kids take marijuana, especially at a younger age, that screws up their brain, and their brain chemistry is destroyed for for the rest of their life, and they're more apt to use other substances and destroy their life in the long term. And we absolutely need some retail regulation and enforcement. There has to be some more laws and teeth with it, because it is the Wild West and nobody's checking on this stuff. People, if CBD stores pretty much could sell whatever they want and nobody's going to check up on it. Gas stations, they could sell this stuff, and there's really very little enforcement with it. So I'll just share a couple things here that I did. I've presented this stuff in the past. So this was some Delta 8 THC that I bought at a CBD store back in October in Green Bay. Sent it off for lab testing. When you see pouch result, this is using a presumptive field test pouch that police officers commonly use. So we get like these little plastic pouches. We put a small amount of the substance in there. We break the glass ampules inside of them from left to right. And we notice the color change inside of there. With this particular one here, this did turn purple. I would expect that because Delta 8 THC, it is tetrahydrocannabinol. That's what these pouches test for, so no surprise there. So when I sent it off to a laboratory for testing, the packaging said it would be 85% Delta 8 THC. It was actually a little bit higher than that. It was 91%. So it's pretty much pure, pretty close to 91%. The guy who sold me this stuff at the CBD store said that when you take a puff off of this, when you titrate your dose, titrate meaning when you inhale that delta 8 THC, he said, don't be fooled by some of the advertisements out there that that delta 8 THC is lighter than marijuana. He said, if you take a deep pull on this and you inhale for 5-10 seconds, you are going to be put on your butt because you're going to be so surprised on how potent this stuff is. Right. So again, I don't want to take any more of what Phil is talking about with environmental scans, but if you get these guys to open up and talk about what this stuff will do as far as the psychotropic effect of these drugs, they are more than willing to share that information with you, including caution on hey buddy, when you start out using this stuff, when you start to vape, you might want to start out with like a 2 or 3 second inhalation and see how it hits you before you take another pull. Because if you take some big 10-second pull on this thing, it's going to put you on your butt, and probably because it comes back at 91% delta 8 THC. I've shared this video in the past before with other stuff, but if you haven't seen it, if you come across a vape and let's say you work in a school and you find little Johnny with one of these vapes and you think it's a THC vape and little Johnny tells you that it's a nicotine vape, one way to tell the difference is nicotine and some of your CBD vapes that are out there are very aqueous. Okay, that bubble that you see in the middle there, it's going to move back and forth. Where where your THC vapes, that bubble is very viscous. It does not move. Okay, and I've also noticed with Delta 8 THC vapes that it's not as a dark colored amber consistency that you see with like the marijuana hash oil vapes. It has like a lighter amber color to it, like you see in this video here. I'm not saying that's always the case, but that's something that I've noticed here. I don't know why it's like that, but I've noticed it has that light amber color to it, but it's just as viscous as the marijuana vape. So just kind of a down and dirty trick here. Here's an example of, if I can get the one on the left to play. Okay, so the one on the left is a CBD vape. It was advertised as 80-some% CBD. It came back at like 30%. But you see the one on the left there, it's very aqueous, that the solution inside there, that amber colored liquid moves very freely inside the vape. And then the one on the right was a vape that we confiscated from a guy when we were teaching new drug recognition experts in Milwaukee. That is a marijuana hash oil vape. Again, notice the dark amber color consistency to it, and it's very viscous. That solution does not move around very much when it's inside that vape. So again, a real down and dirty way to tell the difference between the two. Pretty common warning packaging that you see come out of these places, out of these cannabis stores. They'll put it right on there. And the guy even told me, hey, if the cops stop you with this stuff, point out this labeling that's on here so they don't take your stuff, man. You don't get in trouble. Tell them it's legal. Just point out the stuff, point out the wording on the packaging here. So, that's pretty common. That's out there too. Here are some edibles that I bought. Said it should have had about 10 milligrams of Delta 8 THC per edible. It came back at 4.2, so about half of that. Again, there's no regulation. Just because it says 100 milligrams or just because it says 85% Delta 8, nobody's checking up on it. It could be, dog urine in a vape, and nobody's going to have any enforcement action on it. Or it could have, unfortunately, a lot of these CBD products come back with designer drugs in them, things like synthetic cannabis, so K2 and spice, dextromethorphan, which is what causes impairment in cough syrup. So you could put whatever you want in these substances, and there's nobody checking on the retail side of things to make sure that this is a safe product for people to have. And that absolutely needs to change. Okay, there has to be that there, because you don't want dextromethorphan, or God forbid somebody starts putting designer opiates in this stuff. I mean, what's preventing that from happening? Nothing's preventing it from happening, because the state of Wisconsin's regulations is a dumpster fire dog crap. And I'm sorry for the harsh language, but this is a huge oversight on the state's part, and the state of Wisconsin will not fix it, and it needs to change, and it needs to change now. All right. So pouch result for that was positive. Some other things here too. So the green leafy substance that's being sold is Delta 8. Again, Delta 8 isn't sold in any, or isn't found in any large concentrations in the cannabis plant. So there aren't Delta 8 THC hemp plants or marijuana plants that are grown. So what they're doing as far as putting that like the marijuana looking, or the green leafy substance, is they take the hemp flower. So let's say a CBD or CBG dominant flower, and then they'll use a hemp or a Delta-8 solution and spray it on the plant material. The downside to that is that if they're using like a pure terpene solution to mix in that Delta-8, terpenes are what give marijuana its odor and fragrance. That's a more organic solution to use versus a vape additive. So if they're adding something that you see in vape solution like propylene glycol or vegetable glycerin, that those solutions, if they add Delta-8 to that it's causing some harmful side effects. And I think a lot of you are well established and know very well that we don't really have a lot of long-term data on vaping, but the stuff in the short term where we're seeing kids 16, 17 years old that are having lung transplants or having the lungs capacity of an 80-year-old, it's because of some of these vaping compounds that are in there. So there's a large debate in the cannabis community about restricting by doing the right thing. And I talked to Annie about this yesterday too, but some of these cannabis owners, these companies, they believe in doing the right thing. They're really crusaders for medical cannabis and they want to do things the right way. So they want to use a more organic solution, like using terpenes mixed with Delta-8 because it's not harmful, unlike the vape additives, things like propylene glycol, that are going to have long-term side effects to people. So a lot of them, their heart's in the right place, whether you agree with marijuana or not. But this is one example. I mean, literal like a cat fight on social media about putting some of this crap in the Delta-8 product because of the long-term effects from it, and it's not really medicinal if it's going to harm somebody's lungs. Okay, if you've never seen what dabbing is, I went to the High Times Cannabis Cup in Flint, Michigan, and this was a pretty common occurrence here, but somebody dabbing using a dab rig. So he's warming it up a little bit. He's got an electric nail in there, and he's going to put a little bit of the dab inside the nail, inside the rig, and then the guy's going to smoke it. This is kind of what it looks like if you haven't seen it before. So he's getting it in there. He's going to put the cap on it. And here comes the guy's going to inhale it off the bong. Here it is. So, it's kind of cool too. When I do these presentations, I'm not just pulling them off the internet. Like I go to some of these things like the High Times Cannabis Cup to actually see it in person. And I'm just waiting for the day a defense attorney wants to question me how I know this, because I've seen it in person. I've seen some of this stuff happen. Here's an example of using butane hash oil. When you don't get the butane out of that dab, what can happen? Butane is a very explosive chemical. If you're not ready for it, there are you can look at plenty of examples on the internet of people blowing themselves up from smoking butane hash oil. All right, keep kind of moving on here. Some other things I want to get into, other drug trends as well. We kind of talked a lot about Delta-8 THC. Again, some examples here of some of the edibles that are out there. 300 milligrams of THC. That's like smoking 10 joints, to give you perspective. So we talk about like that thing that happened in Waukesha where those kids ingested mom and dad's edibles. It's like some 7-year-old. He goes into that bag of goldfish crackers like I have coming up here. Like these blowfish crackers. It's like, if he would eat that whole bag, it's like smoking 10 joints. You can imagine the side effect that comes with something like that. So it's something we want to keep out of the hands of kids. So again, to get through the rest of the drug trends here, and I apologize, but I got about a half hour or so, and then I turn it over to Phil. But just kind of keep this in mind that in our state, we saw this huge surge in opiates, in every single time throughout human history that we've had an opiate problem. What we're going through now is not the first time this has happened, but every single time we've had an opiate problem, there's been a surge of stimulant abuse, and that is what we are seeing in our state right now. So I don't have the data from 2020, but 2019, roughly 23% of drug submissions to the Wisconsin Crime Laboratory were methamphetamine. Methamphetamine is huge. I've been a DERE instructor since 2010. And we used to see in the city of Milwaukee, where we trained our new drug recognition experts for the state, it was always crack cocaine. And I'm not saying crack cocaine went away, but we never saw meth in Milwaukee. Now we're seeing a lot of meth, okay? And meth is an equal opportunity. abuser. Okay, so if you think it's just white trailer trash that abuses methamphetamine, you would be wrong. Okay, all colors, all sexes, religions, etc., all abuse methamphetamine, all of them. So if you just think it's just white people, you'd be wrong. Okay, Asian people, black people, any color of the spectrum, they all abuse methamphetamine. All right, so talked about some of this here. There's my dog Major. Some things to take away here too is one thing that we're seeing here across the state of Wisconsin as far as methamphetamine is you expect methamphetamine people to be jacked up, and that's not always the case. Just remember this: what goes up has to come down at some point. So these meth users are binging on methamphetamine for 2-3 days, and at some point your body can only take so much abuse before it starts to crash. So they are going to start to crash, and that's a lot of times where we see them both figuratively and literally crashed into something. So we catch them in car crashes, we catch them passed out. We expect to see more of an opiate, but it ends up turning to be methamphetamine. So keep that in there too. Fentanyl mixed in with methamphetamine, I'm told. I haven't seen any, I don't have any data to show you here, but a lot of the methamphetamine in my part of the state, I would imagine it's the same case in other places, is fentanyl is mixed in with the meth. So if you come across it, just be really, really careful, because meth is not a drug you want to mess with anyway, but fentanyl is obviously extremely dangerous. I would imagine there'd be other designer opiates other than fentanyl mixed in with it as well. Some of the reasons I get from, again, this is anecdotal, but a lot of people that use meth tell me that they're using it for medicinal purposes. So they were on ADHD medication as a kid, or they got it through some type of diversion. So their friend was on the medication, and now they got some pills from their friend that they were taking it for medicinal purposes. And another common one that I heard, it's extremely stupid, was, but again, perception sometimes is reality, is people would say that they're not going to overdose from methamphetamine. If you take enough methamphetamine, you will overdose. It's not the same as an opiate or a narcotic analgesic overdose, but you will die if you take too much methamphetamine. Okay. I talked about some of these in the past. We talk about Manti meth and some of the meth problems we've had in our city. And I'm not sharing any protected information. These are all news clips here, but the suspect in a toddler death, this is from a couple of years ago in Manitowoc. A lesson learned on not using Facebook or Craigslist to find your babysitters. Unfortunately, Eddie Gomez is one guy, and I forgot the name of the female that was involved here. Mom dropped her kid off there to watch him. They were using methamphetamine. They beat the crap out of a 3-year-old and caused significant injuries that resulted in his death. Very unfortunate, but this is what happens with methamphetamine. The other one there, we had an officer involved shooting a few years ago. Guy came back with high levels of methamphetamine and amphetamine in his system. And my message to police officers is just be careful with people high on meth, because they are dangerous. Okay. And we saw that play out in Two Rivers about a year ago. Officer involved shooting there. Guy was trying to reach for a gun to shoot the Two Rivers officer. The officer in that case, Officer Dakota Gomez of the Two Rivers Police Department, was on his A game that day, and he picked up on some deceptive behavior from the suspect, and that the suspect was trying to kill him. And Officer Gomez defended himself in that instance. But there again, guy high in methamphetamine. And I've seen some stats from the state of Georgia that 25% of their police shootings involve people under the influence of methamphetamine. So be careful. This is a dangerous drug. You don't want to mess with people on it. And I do tell police officers, if you think somebody's under the influence of meth, the more help you can get, the more backup you can get, the better. You don't want to mess with these people. And then another common theme here we're seeing with methamphetamine use, and I'm going to show you a video here too of a guy from D Research, but another woman arrested last year. She was taking her child's Ritalin medication, getting high off of it, and then also too giving sex lessons to a bunch of 13-year-olds with the medication. Again, I'm not giving any privileged information. This is all stuff that was out on released through the news media, but you see a lot of this stuff play out. Methamphetamine acts on the same receptors in the brain as sexual activity. A lot of people that enjoy sexual activity, they will also take methamphetamine to enhance the sexual effects of it. Some things to look for here as far as signs and symptoms of abuse. We look some things that we teach police officers on, some examples to look for here. Heat bumps on the back of the tongue. So these are some photos that I took when I became a DRE instructor back in 2010. Those bumps on the back of the tongue when you smoke a hot substance. Okay, so if you smoke methamphetamine from a meth pipe, the bumps on the back of your tongue, those little receptors on the back there, they will raise up, and because of the heat that's produced from that smoke. Okay, so that's one thing we look for here. If you snort drugs through your nose, the inside of your nose starts to become devoid of hair and becomes red and inflamed because the chemicals in it. I'll show you a picture of what happens over long term. Crank bugs on the skin. Okay, the same lady here, that let me take a picture of her tongue. This was her legs. These chemicals released histamines in the blood. People keep scratching their skin. You'll see pick marks on people's faces. If you're looking for some more examples to see in person, just go through Walmart. Your local Walmart or similar store is going to have plenty of drug impaired people. You'll see every time I go into Walmart, I'll see somebody there with pick marks on their face, on their legs, on their arms. Pretty common thing. They just pick at their skin and keep picking and picking and picking. We also see that too with heroin abuse. Another photo here again. This woman here, this is when I worked at a previous agency. I was doing a sexual assault investigation, and she was a witness to it. And we got off topic a little bit, talked about her methamphetamine abuse, and she's willing to share a photo with me. What happened to her? She loved to snort methamphetamine when she was younger, and she developed a deviated septum from that abuse. So that was the inside. Pretty much that soft tissue that divides your nostrils in her was worn away from it. This is a gentleman here. This is from the state of Oklahoma. What he did is to not get in trouble with the police. He decided to eat a bag of methamphetamine that he was dealing. It looks like he's also made other poor life decisions based on the tattoos on his face. But you see his eyes jerking around like that. What I try to tell officers that are learning to be drug recognition experts is, even though we typically wouldn't see the jerkiness of the eyes with methamphetamine or other stimulants, that doesn't mean that's the case all the time. We don't know what happens to people when they eat a bag of methamphetamine, because it would be unreasonable and imprudent to do that with a live person because of the risk and potential overdose effects of it. But so while we teach officers to know that with methamphetamine abuse, we shouldn't see a jerkiness of the eyes, it certainly doesn't mean that's the case all of the time, because we don't know what it's just unsafe to test have people smoke meth or inject meth and see what they do. You could have situations like this where this guy, you're going to have somebody's eyes that are jerking all over the place because of what they took. So this is an example here of, here, I'm going to move there. This guy here is hot railing. We see this quite a bit here too. In fact, one thing that we teach police officers to look for, as far if we're doing drug interdiction or tips to look for in houses or cars, is look for these torches. If you find somebody who has no mechanic or mechanical aptitude, or doesn't look like they couldn't tell one type of hammer from a different, or a Phillips screwdriver from a flathead screwdriver, and they got a bunch of torches in their back in their back seat, it's obvious that they wouldn't use this for any legitimate carpentry purpose or mechanical purpose. They're probably using it to do stuff like this. So this is called hot railing, and he's just warming up the pipe before he snorts the methamphetamine that he's going to have on the mirror. Some things that we teach to look for: if somebody is using this form of ingestion, to look at the person's fingers. I can't believe how hot that would be to hold that pipe. And this guy's going to light this thing up for about 60 seconds before he ingests it. Okay. So, look for his charred fingertips. Look inside his nose. His nostrils should be inflamed from doing this. He might even have some white stuff up his nose when we look inside there, do that nostril check. But these burnt fingertips, like a photo that I have here, these are things that we want to look for that are going to show the signs and symptoms of abuse. I talked a little bit about sexual activity. Just know that that's out there. Like this guy here, hopefully the sound shows up.
We can't hear it.
Oh, you can't hear it? Oh, shoot. Okay. All right, so we'll just kind of keep going here. Okay, so what he's explaining is for him when he takes methamphetamine, it's like sex times 10. That kind of sucks. I wish I could share it. Anyway, so he takes methamphetamine. After he ejaculates, he's still feeling the positive side effects from ejaculating even a little bit later. So 5-10 minutes later, he still feels like he's having an orgasm. And just how addictive that drug is. So for most humans, sexual activity is going to be the most pleasurable thing that we experience in our life. And if you take that and you add in methamphetamine, you can just imagine why this drug in that situation becomes so addictive, because of how methamphetamine acts on those same receptors in our brains. Plus, you add in sex with it, and that there's some women. He even talks about it in the video, and I wish it's too bad, because the true experts on drug impairment really are the people that use stuff like methamphetamine. So him describing it, maybe when we get back to doing live stuff, I can share that one. But he gives that perspective there too, and he even talks about women who inject methamphetamine. They orgasm right after without any sex whatsoever. They inject meth and they orgasm right away, and he talks about that a little bit as well. So kind of keep this stuff in mind when I come across a house with a bunch of porn, in and of itself, or a car with a bunch of porn. In and of itself, it doesn't mean much, or sex toys. But usually, if I see that, that's going to be a clue that there might be some meth use associated with it. I was coming to work one night, and I was falling behind a car, and it went up on the curb and struck a telephone pole. And I was like, well, that might be a clue. I need to, even though I'm not on the clock yet, I might need to check into that. And long story short, the guy was using methamphetamine, and in his trunk, he had a fishing tackle box full of sex toys. You name it, it was in there. It was quite disgusting. But yeah, I mean, methamphetamine users, if you see porn, sex toys, that kind of thing, you're probably dealing with somebody who's abusing methamphetamine. Okay. Increased risk of heart disease. That's a big thing. People injecting methamphetamine. You see that a lot. There's quite a few. There's some stuff out there that I thought at the study I saw, like 25% of methamphetamine users are actually starting to develop some heart infections from injecting the drug, and there's some adverse effects of that. So this guy here, back again. Unfortunately, the sound isn't there. This is a pretty good video. He's going to show us how he's injecting. I wish the sound was here, but some things to pay attention here with him. When you're looking for drug impairment, you look at the eyes. Now, he had been using heroin, or what probably was fentanyl laced with heroin in there. He did come back positive for opiates. But one thing to notice with him when the video goes around is his eyes. Look how glossy his eyes is. You'll see that a lot with opiate abuse. Again, you can't see the constricted pupils, and unfortunately, you can't hear his voice and how raspy it is. But he has dried up his veins in his arms and other parts of his body to the point where he is now moving on to injecting into his neck, and he has developed track marks. Here, we'll play it here. So these track marks here, that is his artery. That is his carotid artery that he is developing some track marks to. Yeah, and he tells me here, yeah, because I told him, hey man, that's your artery. And he's like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be sticking needles in there anymore. And I said, yeah, maybe you shouldn't be doing that. But you can see, like here, his carotid artery is now getting a track mark in it. You can see just the infection down here. And he talks about a little bit too on how he gets a quicker high from injecting into his carotid artery. And in a moment here, he's going to show us the right side of his neck. He just said that he thinks it's a problem. He probably should stop. But this bump on his neck here, this was an infection. He said it was probably like a golf ball size before this. It was still a pretty noticeable lump. But somebody tried injecting him and they missed into his neck. And as a result of that, he had this big golf ball on the side of his face. And here too, I mean, you can see the swelling and the infection that starts on the bottom of his neck. So, and he injects quite a bit into his neck. So I mean, it's just crazy. That kind of stuff is out there, and eventually, over long-term abuse. And I think, and where I think what's important to this conversation is this is why we want to catch this stuff. He started using heroin when he was 13 years old. Okay, 13 years old, he started using hard drugs, and that's why things like that you guys are doing, why that's so important, because you want to catch those people when they're that young, so that when they're in the mid 20s like this gentleman, they're not moving on, because eventually that high, they're going to have to find other avenues to get high, whether it's stuff like this with fentanyl or other designer opiates we'll talk about here in a second. But they're going to constantly be chasing that first high that they got to get a bigger and better high. So, because as their tolerance develops, they're not able to get that high that they once got. So they're going to be exploring new ways. And over the course of this guy's life, he went from starting out with stuff like marijuana and alcohol. He got into hard drugs at a young age, and now he's in his mid 20s. And I would imagine if he keeps it up here and he keeps injecting into his carotid artery, if the drugs don't kill him, if he doesn't take a hot dose of fentanyl or some of these other designer opiates, what's going to do him in is his body's just going to shut down, because it only can put up with so much abuse. I mean, once your carotid artery is shut off, it's game over. So here's some other stuff here about fentanyl. And I think what you should be concerned about here is a lot of this stuff now is being disguised in as fraudulent medications. So fake oxycodone, this is what cartels are doing. They're using things like the binding agent and mixing it in, and they're trying to create fake pills like the stuff you see here. These are photos that I got from the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA website. I took a class out in California at the DEA facility north of San Diego, and they are constantly dealing. The cartels in Mexico are making fake oxycodone pills. They look just like the real thing, like you see here, and really what's in them is fentanyl, because most people, if they get a prescription medication, they believe they can trust that it's going to not kill them because of how prescription drugs are regulated. So cartels know that, so they're going to make fake pills, and usually they go for about $1 a milligram. So a 20 milligram oxycodone pill is going to sell for about $20. But people are going to use prescription medications because they don't want to overdose and risk that with illicit drugs like heroin or fentanyl. But cartels have picked up on that and are making knockoff medications like you see here. The big trend that we're seeing now is these designer opiates. So these research chemicals that were made in a lab in the 70s, 1960s, 50s, 70s. A lot of these pharmaceutical companies were looking to make new drugs, new type of opiates or narcotic analgesic drugs to control pain. Drugs like carfentanil were developed as a tranquilizer, as a pain sedative for larger animals, things like elephants and rhinos, that kind of thing. I mean, you can't give a rhinoceros something like regular morphine because you need just a crap ton of it to control an animal that size. So they developed and researched these other fentanyl compounds like carfentanil to help control pain in larger animals. And drugs like isotonitazine and others like it are the research, the papers are out there. So if you know where to look for, you can find how to make these drugs. So these Chinese companies, what they're doing is they're going on the internet and they're getting the playbook from the research that's out there, and they're making these things in a lab. So we're coming across this quite a bit. And on enforcement purposes, you see this stuff pop up now, even in Northeast Wisconsin. We're seeing that pop up on drug screens. We're seeing it pop up when we send stuff off to a laboratory for testing. But these new compounded drugs that are out there are showing up, and many of them are more potent, like even hydromorphone. I mean, that has a very powerful, very potent opiate. And you're seeing these other compounds start to show up. And what's important here is that these new ones that are coming up, they were never tested in humans. These are research chemicals, and we don't know what the long-term side effects are of these drugs. And in Wisconsin, we just listed them late last year under emergency scheduling. So they are considered illegal here. But what these companies do, or what these illicit drug manufacturers do, is they're trying to find these research chemicals that aren't yet outlawed in the United States. So 2 years ago, isotonitazine and etotonitazine, these were chemicals, these were opiates that weren't outlawed here. So they found that research and they started to sell heroin that really was isotonitazine, as a way to get around the United States controlled substance laws at the time. What I tell police officers is, if you come across somebody that says that what they have in their possession, they think it's heroin, and you do a test of that substance using a presumptive drug pouch, and it doesn't test positive for heroin, that doesn't mean that there's not an illicit or designer opiate in that drug, because those pouches only can test for so much stuff. So don't like kick the person loose or not send charges over because you have an inconclusive test, that you might have to send that substance off to a laboratory to get that result back there. But a lot of these drug manufacturers are switching to some of these drugs out there. Here's just another example of some of the other designer opiates that we have out there. All of these have been found in Wisconsin. And it doesn't matter if it's U47700 or AH7921. If somebody ingests these drugs, it's going to, the impairment that the officer, or the impairment that you're going to see, is going to look just like heroin or any other narcotic analgesic drug. And a lot of them can be found on the internet. Just some examples here of some non-medical injection sites. So when I teach police officers on how to put the wording in the report, I'm very specific. Don't put injection sites, because if you, like, any of you got like COVID shots, they're not going to inject the COVID medication, that vaccination, into the crook of your arm. They're going to put it in a muscular area. People that inject into their veins, those are non-medical injection sites. They're using the same needles over and over again. Here's a picture of what happens when that happens. When you use the same needle over and over again, you start that starts to fall apart, and it starts to cause infection, because a lot of times they're not prepping it correctly, and they're using the same site. So you see the bruising and all that other stuff that comes up. Another common thing that we're seeing right now, and I'll wrap it up here and I'll give it to Phil here in another couple of minutes, but synthetic benzodiazepines. So drugs like Xanax. You can go on the internet and you can find some of these other ones like now I'm having a fight with the English language, but some of these other designer benzodiazepines that are out there, we're finding about 15% of drug samples, what I'm told, from the State Lab of Hygiene for impaired drivers. They're coming back with some of these designer benzos in them. Again, people can go on the internet, order this stuff, and they're going to get the same high or similar high that they would get from taking Xanax. And then real quick here, we'll end on psilocybin mushrooms. This is around the country right now, you're seeing a push to legalize psychedelics. That is the push. So the next step in this, there's a trend in this country to legalize all drugs. And the playbook that the psychedelic community is using is the same one that was used by medical marijuana back in the late 80s and the 1990s. They are pushing this stuff off as for medicinal purposes, largely to treat some psychological conditions, things like PTSD and depression. And we're starting to see more of it here in the Manitowoc area. I would imagine it's the same no matter where you work across the state, but we're seeing more and more of this stuff show up. Some standard urine tests won't test for psilocybin. It kind of depends on what they're looking for. And, again, things like psilocybin or synthetic THC or some other designer drugs that you see out there, or dextromethorphan, a lot of these tests, a lot of these urine tests, aren't going to test for some of those psychotropic drugs, these designer drugs that are out there. So like, maybe I don't want to smoke marijuana because I know I'm going to show up hot on a urine test, but I'll smoke something like K2 or Spice because I'm going to get a high that I want. I'm going to get that escape from reality. And if I get a random drug screen, it's not going to show up on that test. So my employer won't fire me for having a prohibited substance in my blood. Okay. And then real quick here, I'm going to just go back. So we're seeing a lot more of that. Another one we're seeing here is another GHB start to show up. Unfortunately here, this is a big date rape drug. I would keep this one on your radar. It's been my experience investigating GHB that a lot of our meth users are using this drug in combination with their meth use. I spoke to one female in particular, and she said that GHB is like her go-to drug. She loves this drug. It's a happy drug. She takes this and it gives a heightened alcohol effect to her. So this was a video that I took when I went to California. I learned how to make GHB. We used it. There's the precursor chemical for making GHB is a chemical called GBL. You mix that in with things like red double I and some other base type chemicals, and you'll get that powdery solution in the middle. So it's relatively pretty easy to make. And again, it's kind of like the easiest way to explain it. It's like alcohol and ecstasy mixed together. And unfortunately, if you get a good enough dose of it, it can also act as a date rape drug as well. In fact, there's a case pending. And again, I'm not sharing any privileged information, but there was a bartender in Mishicot, Wisconsin, who was alleged to have dosed one of the patrons with GHB and then tried fondling her and some other inappropriate things. So this, if it's in my neck of the woods, I guarantee it's probably where you live too. But keep this one on your radar. I would expect as methamphetamine use continues to grow and become more popular, that some of these other drugs like GHB will go with it as a partner substance. So Phil, I think I'm going to leave it at that. I know it's 1:45, or now it's 10:02. I'm going too long here, and I know you wanted to take some time to talk about your environmental scans and questions at the end.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Nick, for a very interesting presentation. I know you certainly have enlightened us on things that are going on right now. But you had mentioned the environmental scans before, and what I'd really like to do, Dorothy Cheney, our fantastic trainer that we have for the Alliance for Wisconsin Youth, and of course internationally and nationally, but she put together a scan for us to use. And Dorothy, I'm presuming you're on the line?
I am, yeah, and I don't know if I can share the screen. Can you let me screen share, and I'll bring up the instrument and then I'll put it in the chat box.
Just one second. Yep.
So thanks. So as Phil is getting that ready, some of you know this already. The Delta 8, Nick, thank you for an amazing presentation. The Delta 8 has been sort of on our radar as a set of regional centers. And here in Marshfield, I did some just preliminary visiting of CBD, and I found, I can't even tell you, within an hour, I had spent $350 and bought gummies. I bought mango D8 lollipops. It's amazing. When I got the gummies, and I don't know if you can see it, they're really little. They told me to take half of one, that a dose was half a gummy. So what we did as a set of regional centers is, and Nick has framed it perfectly. Nick, you're brilliant. Is that before we can move into action, we need to be equipped with information. And so what we are going to coordinate across all of the regions of the Alliance Wisconsin Youth is a local Delta 8 scan. And I'm going to just share my screen, and I'm going to show you, there's two parts to this, and I'm just going to show you really quickly what it is that we would encourage you to do. Of course, what we're going to do, first of all, and I'm going to put this in the chat box after I go through it, is we've just developed a really quick environmental scan data collection form. So if you've done any tobacco scans, this is going to look familiar to you. It's been adapted for Delta 8. So you would fill out one of these per store. Now, don't take it into the store with a clipboard. You'll want to go through the store, just eyeball it, and then maybe complete it when you get back in the car. Although, here in Marshfield, I had great conversations with people who love Delta 8 in the stores. They wanted to tell me all about it, although they thought I was police. And I was like, no, I'm not the police. Clearly, I don't look like a cop. But this is for you. So store information, you can circle which type it is: convenience store, gas station, vape shop, some sort of a small market, or like a specific CBD store, because we've got all of those in our community. And then yes or no, is it within 1,000 feet of a school, a daycare center? So again, we're building off of what we've used with tobacco scans. And then over here, I've got the product type. Now, this is based on what I saw. So I imagine there's other products, but we've seen gummies, lollipops. There were pre-rolled joints. There is the flavored liquid for vape pens. And it's interesting because in some of the places you can't buy vape, but you can buy the Delta 8 pods at age 18. So get as much information as you can. We also, and I've got all these products here, we also had loose bud and then other. Now, let me tell you, as you're going through this, please, and I'll put my email in, send me if you see other products so I can update the instrument and get it out to folks. We also want to know, like, are they self-served? Are they in locked cases? Is there other paraphernalia? There's so much paraphernalia in some of these stores. This is a great opportunity to sort of catalog and enumerate that. I saw in some of the places where I went in that there were signs saying that it may show up on drug tests, and then there were signs saying it wouldn't. So obviously they're trying to market it to people who are under drug testing. A lot of them are court mandated. So we want to get as much information as possible. So there's information about packaging and then other products. This is the first part. This would be, say you have 8 locations in your community, you're going to have 8 of these forms filled out. That's for you. Get as much information as you can. This will be great information for you to take to your city council to try to work on limiting outlet density at some point, for example. So this is for local communities to drive your work. I'm going to stop sharing. Once you do your environmental scan, we also developed a different form. And this is, I'm going to bring it up now. Let me see, screen share now. The limitations of Zoom. And Nick, if you've got any other thoughts on this as you look at, I know Annie showed it to you yesterday. We'd love any thoughts. We wanted to make sure that Nick had a chance to eyeball it before we rolled it out. So once you finish your scans, we want you to do a summary sheet. So you're going to have more detailed information in your community of Marshfield or Manitowoc or Fond du Lac, whatever that is, but you're going to give to your regional center. So the Northwoods Coalition team, Hannah Lepper if you're in the Southeast, Phil or I if you're in the South or the Northeast. And you're just going to tell us your coalition name, your county, which region you're in, and then summarize all of those individual scans. How many were in convenience stores? How many were in gas stations? So this is literally just a summary sheet. So you're going to have more information to drive your local work. We, as a series of regional centers, are going to compile all of these summary sheets. And then we're going to have some state level data to identify how many communities we scanned, how many stores, how many convenience stores are selling Delta 8, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we are moving this as fast as we can. So if you're willing to do this, first of all, I'm going to open up for real quick questions. And Nick, anything you have to contribute, we would love to hear. We are encouraging coalitions to do this. There's no money involved. This is just, this is an emerging trend we need data on, and coalitions are particularly well poised to do this. And secondly, we really want to be able to get a statewide snapshot of what's happening in terms of availability for Delta 8. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And Nick, I'm going to turn it over to you and then any other questions that folks might have.
Yeah, I mean, you hit it on the head, Dorothy. It's just mind boggling that you can't buy tobacco or a vape product for nicotine in these places, but you can get a psychotropic substance in the same place. It's just mind boggling. And just the age restrictions. I think it's a great idea because, again, I think to add to that a little bit too, when people make the case to politicians why we need these laws, one of the things that they're going to look at, and again, just my experience dealing with administrators and bringing things up to politicians, is they want the data. They like, okay, if there's a problem, then where is it? Tell me where that it exists. And I think what you guys are doing is great because you're getting that data and like, look at, this is the problem. Here it is. We got how many CBD stores. Nobody knows how many there were till we did this. And we got X, Y, and Z problem here. They need that to make decisions. It's like, holy crap, I didn't know this existed. But until somebody does the groundwork and the grassroots efforts that you guys are doing, the politicians or people that make decisions on this stuff aren't going to buy into it. So I think it's great. I think it's just an awesome grassroots things that you guys are doing.
So there was thank you, Nick. I mean, again, this is not a perfect process. I'm trying to I uploaded a series of SAP slides inadvertently, so you guys don't need the SAP slides. But so there was a question in the chat box. What about the counties that don't have coalitions, and how this is not meant to be something that we're going to do a research paper on. We know we don't have complete statewide reach. If you're in Marshfield and Wood County, and I don't have a coalition in Clark County, I'm just brainstorming. We do have one. If you wanted to go beyond your own county, that's great. But what we're trying to get, and what we're going to frame it as, is here's a snapshot from the Alliance Wisconsin Youth. We're not claiming that it's going to be exhaustive. What we're trying to do is gather some data that will start the conversation and will start to illustrate just how readily available these products are. So this is a starting point. It's not going to be perfect data, but it's the best we can do right now. And for some reason, the scan summary went in, but I'm having a problem with the Delta 8, the individual scan. So I'm gonna try that. Any other questions, Nick or Phil, that you guys want to answer? I'm going to try to put that scan in there.
Somebody asked about the PowerPoint slides. I'll give Phil or Annie a copy of it, and we can go from there. I don't think unfortunately we didn't do that. So, but I'll make sure it gets out to them, and we can distribute from there if that looks good, Phil.
Yeah, that's great. There was another question about, is anyone going to analyze the results of the scans?
Yep, and that's why we want you to send to your regional center the summary sheet. So you're going to have all of the raw data for yourself. You're going to do a summary sheet, which is going to be sent to your regional center. So you know which Alliance. If you don't know which region you're in by any chance, we can certainly help you with that. The regional centers are going to compile it by region. So the Northwoods Coalition will have their summaries. We'll have ours for the Northeast and South. And then as a set of regional centers, we're going to compile it for a state snapshot. So we will compile and then analyze that data. Yes, absolutely.
Nick, can you share your contact information again? Someone was looking for
I did.
that.
I just put it in the comments. So it's
Okay.
DRE11379 @gmail.com. That's my DRE number that the Chiefs of Police Association gave me years ago. Now they're into the 30,000s. So it kind of gives you, been doing this a while, but DRE11379 @gmail.com.
Thank you.
This is Annie, and I would just share too, so through the Northeast and the South regions, we have a website that has information. And so on that website, we have a tab and it's called projects. And then there's a tab that has Delta 8. So we will have this information up there, including the environmental scan. We have a video from a store owner talking about Delta 8 and some of this stuff as well. And then we also started a discussion board. So, and Phil, I'm sorry, I'm not by my computer, but I'm wondering if someone could type in the link. So we can open this up to the state as well, because it's a great opportunity for us to have, especially the discussion board, to just talk about like what we're seeing and who's like what you're finding as you're doing this research and doing these scans. So that's just another option if people want to continue through this effort as well together. And Nick, maybe I'll add you too, so that way you can see some of the comments and help guide us along the process as well, if you wouldn't mind.
Absolutely.
One of the other things that I'll just jump in and say, and you guys know that we talk about triangulation, an environmental scan is a really good snapshot of how it's available. But I would also recommend having key stakeholder interviews. And I would say whoever is your favorite local law enforcement officer, to have a conversation with them. Just to share really quickly, I've got a go-to law enforcement here in Marshfield. And after I went through and I purchased all this Delta 8, I connected with BJ and I said, what's going on? And he said, oh, Delta 8's blowing up. And he said, in one evening shift, not just him, but his shift, there were 12 encounters with youth and Delta 8. in one shift in the last week. So, I mean, it's everywhere. And he said that they also found out that while in the front of the house, the Delta 8 was being sold behind the counter, that there were some not so reputable vape shop owners that were selling Delta 9 behind the counter in a back room. So, so the scan is a really good piece. That's going to give us a statewide snapshot. But I would also recommend having some key stakeholder interviews locally to get that depth of what's happening in your community. I don't know, Nick, if you've got thoughts on that, but law enforcement seem to be really being pummeled with this.
Absolutely. Yeah. We've had EMS calls where people have taken like 100 milligram dose of Delta 8 and they think they're dying or they hallucinate and the paramedics get called. That's pretty common. I've heard from the same stories about the back room. That's pretty common, where the CBD store or the vape stop. I know we come across people and, well, you know, I made contact with Jimmy and he said, if I said the code word, blah, 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 that, you know, so-and-so behind the counter would show me the secret room or give me the Delta 9 cartridge. So that's common. And just the front for selling marijuana. Yeah, any other, I think it's a great that what you guys are doing. You got to have it, because when they're going to ask what the problem is, then you have the data to show it.
So somebody just asked, I'm sorry, it was really quickly, the deadline for completing. We didn't put an actual hard and fast deadline. I'm going to say we're at the end of May. If we could have it by, and I'm going to ask the other regional centers, because you guys are on there too. We'll also follow up with emails through our regional center distribution list, but we wanted to make sure that the scans were also provided just in time during this when we had Nick to help inform it. I would say that if we could have them done by the end of June, that would be great. And then we could compile them. Is 4 weeks enough for your communities to do it? And last thing I'll say to that is, before I actually went out and started purchasing, I actually did a scan online. Most vape shops have, if they don't have websites, they've got Facebook pages. So I just Facebook messaged the vape shops and I said, do you sell Delta 8? And it was immediate responses every time. They're like, come on down, it's our biggest seller. So I actually had a lot of the legwork done online. 4 weeks is pretty quick. So that's why I was asking. I mean, it's, I think if you can get it done in 4 weeks, I'm going to ask Megan, are you still on? And Hannah, are you guys, and what are your thoughts from the other regional centers? We want to give people enough time, but we also don't want this to be belabored into September. We'd like to get this, information as much as possible, as quickly as possible.
Yeah, this is Megan Pickler here. And I would say if coalitions can get it done by the end of June, great. Otherwise, I think a 2-month deadline would be more feasible, only because then coalitions can have a meeting to discuss how they're going to do it and then actually complete it. And that would be a 2-month time frame.
All right. I would say August is too late, but if we can do it by the end of July, because I mean, there's no need for taking, I mean, this can be done. I did the scan in Marshfield in 3 hours. So it's not something that's going to take weeks and weeks. If you can mobilize your coalition to do it, unless you're living in Milwaukee, it might take longer than that, of course. It's going to take a lot longer, but in smaller communities. All right, so let's work on July. Hannah also said July. So let's say if folks can have it done by the end of July, that feels like most coalitions can do that. We can always update it if folks are after that. We can update our analysis, but if we could have it in by the end of July, then that means probably by the middle of August, we'd have a statewide report.
Here, I'll just jump in. Somebody asked at a recent conference, we were shown over-the-counter drugs that are abused to achieve highs similar to meth and heroin. What types of over-the-counter drugs are you see trending in abuse? The big one here that we come across as far as over-the-counter is dextromethorphan, which is the ingredient in cough syrup. Dextromethorphan in lower doses. So I had a cold about a month ago that was not COVID, and it was pretty bad. I ended up taking one day, a sick day at work because of it. But to help me recover, I used some NyQuil. NyQuil does the trick for me. A smaller dose of that is not going to get you high, but if you take a bunch of the cough syrup, that dextromethorphan in there does cause hallucinations. Spoke to one guy once that abused that stuff, and he said he figured out what the right dose for him was by going onto various websites like Arrowhead and researching the dose amounts. And he found out that if he took, I forgot what it was, but the dose he needed, he could start to have out-of-body experiences, including the last time he did it. He said he put a religious podcast on, put his earbuds on, played it, and about an hour later, he was talking to Jesus Christ. So it kind of give you perspective there. Unfortunately, with dextromethorphan, is we do get people that fight and they look just like they are on methamphetamine. They're sweating. Sometimes we see pupil dilation, high heart rate, high blood pressure, all that kind of stuff, and just a crazy appearance. So dextromethorphan in high levels will do that, and people can be a bear to deal with. The heroin side of it, I know I haven't come across it personally myself, but I know in the area others have. Imodium AD or diarrhea medications in those. I forgot off the top of my head. I don't know what the actual drug in Imodium AD that causes this, but if you take enough Imodium AD, it will give a narcotic analgesic high, similar to heroin or fentanyl or oxycodone. But you got to take a lot of it to get there. So about a year ago, year and a half ish, there were a lot of like the Walgreens and drug companies, like the pharmaceutical ones around like Walgreens and CVS and things like that. They were running out of Imodium AD and some of these other similar anti-diarrhea medications because the drug users couldn't find what they're looking for, and they would take the Imodium AD in high doses to get that heroin high to either stave off withdrawals or something similar to that. That was pretty common. I have not heard that one coming around. And quite honestly, there's so much heroin and fentanyl just floating around. I can't believe you couldn't find it if you looked hard enough. But that's pretty common out there too. Those would be the two big ones. I'm sure there's some others, but those are what we deal with the most. Well, Phil, I don't really, if nobody else has any questions, I'll make sure I get the PowerPoint in and distributed. Benadryx, abuse in the area. Yeah, that's, I'm sure it's out there. I haven't personally come across that one yet. We do come across like the Benadryl stuff every once in a while, where people are on the influence of that. And some of these other ones that get brought up, a lot of times they're being mixed as a cutting agent, like some of the ones you mentioned, the Benadryx, and man, I'm going to have a fight with the English language if I try to pronounce the one that starts with P. But anyway, where we do see some of these come in is especially like on a tox screen. So we come across an impaired driver where these start to show up is drug dealers, to make money, will cut their drugs. And when I say cut, they're going to dilute it. So they're going to, let's say they got 100% heroin, they're going to take half of that, and instead of having 100% heroin, they'll be like 50% heroin, and then they'll add some other one of these other compounds in there to save money. There's another one out there. It's a horse tranquilizer. I think the name of it. Slips me. It's a horse tranquilizer that's added to it. In fact, in Milwaukee, when we did Deary field search, they were talking about the horse tranquilizer that they knew was mixed in. I'm trying to think
Ketamine.
of it. It's not ketamine. It's another one. No, it's name slips me. But anyway, they're mixing in these other compounds with heroin to make more money. So they they can buy, or some of these others, these designer benzodiazepines, they're mixing it in because they could get it for cheap. They get it cheaper from what they could buy for heroin or fentanyl. And to make more money, they dilute the heroin, add this in. And for the end user, they're not really noticing a big difference to it. I'm going to find the name of it. I think it's Xyrem is the name of it. It starts with an X. Here, I'm going to put it in my phone.
Xylazine.
Xylazine, that's it. That starts with that. Yeah, xylazine. So yeah, I just put horse tranquilizer into Google, and the first one that came up was horse tranquilizer emerges as new and deadly street drug in the U.S. So we did Deary field search about a month ago, and quite a few of them had said that they knew that in addition to fentanyl, it's xylazine. They didn't know it was xylazine, but there was a horse tranquilizer was also mixed in there. So if it's in the Milwaukee area, places like Manitowoc, or where probably a lot of you are from, we're down the line from the Milwaukee area, but our drug dealers are getting, their sources are either Milwaukee or Chicago. So this was a trend that picked up in Michigan. They had some overdoses from xylazine late last year. It was a matter of time before that rolled to here. So I would imagine as an additive to heroin, you're going to see, or to fentanyl, whatever the street drug is getting sold as, you're seeing xylazine or some of these other compounds mixed in there because the drug dealers are trying to make money. I had a laugh last year that it was on WBAY. They had a story on there that some of these designer opiates that were hitting the market was because of COVID. It's like, it's not because of COVID. That's not why they're doing this to make money. It has nothing to do with COVID. Drug dealers are in it to make money. They're putting this stuff in there as a way to dilute the heroin so they have more of it to make more money. It has nothing to do with COVID. I don't know where that came from, but it's absolutely not the case. Drug dealers are in it to make money. End of story. You can tell I'm a little tired of COVID. I'm kind of happy. Isn't it kind of neat that things are starting to open up again? It's we're having like baseball games with kids, and it's just kind of cool that life is returning back to normal, which is good.
Yeah, let's embrace the new normal
Right?
coming our way. And absolutely. Well, thank you again, Nick, for an outstanding presentation.
Thank you.
You certainly engaged us and enlightened us, and we really appreciate it. Dorothy, thanks for sharing the scan. And to all of you who've been on here, we certainly appreciate your efforts in conducting scans. And as Dorothy said, a lot of it you can probably do online and making a few contacts, and the folks will probably be willing to very much share what they have because they're trying to get everybody to come in and purchase, because they're all about making money too. Dorothy, anything? Or Annie, anything?
I'll just say really quickly, so you'll be getting an email from your regional center, because we're all going to make sure that we follow up, so you'll get reach. I also put my email in the chat box, but I'll also make sure that it goes out through all the regional centers. If you've got any question on the method or the instrument, I'll be the keeper of any edits for that. And then maybe we'll do a statewide webinar once everybody's done the scan, so we can have a chance to sort of process what we all found and what next steps would be as we look at the information. And maybe we'll ask Nick if he would join us for that call too, because I would love for Nick to be able to be there with us as we talk about what we found.
Sure. Oh, I'd be really interested. Thank you. That would be great.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Phil.
Thank you, Dorothy. Annie, anything else?
Nope. Thanks everyone for being here, and especially thanks to Nick. And Nick, you know, we've got your back too. So any way we can help you, we're here to do that as well. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you again for the invitation.
Thanks everyone for joining us. And the information will be available. And like Dorothy said, we will make sure that the scans are available to all of you. And we appreciate your efforts, and have a great rest of the day and a wonderful holiday weekend, everybody. So thank you all. And we're going to wrap it up. So thanks again, Nick.
You're most welcome. Thanks again for the invitation. Hey, Phil, I'll you know what, or Annie, I'll just